the Iraqis say the Islamic State caliphate is over, but why no big celebration?
Well, because it's over territorially. They're not holding territory in Iraq. I mean, they're still in existence in Syria, and there's still many of their fighters that have gone elsewhere. They have fled Mosul. Some have been killed, of course, but others have fled Mosul, and they still exist, and they're still an issue. But as far as holding territory, you know, the Iraqi military now has control of Mosul.
Chris, the Russians say they're pretty certain they killed the Caliph Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi last month. The United States says it killed the head of ISIS propaganda wing and also the ISIS Grand Mufti. So does this mean the end of ISIS?
Not at all, George. In fact, they're fighting in the Philippines. Just to add what Gary has already said, they may not be the kind of caliphate they have been for the last 3 years since al-Baghdadi declared the caliphate in 2014, but they will continue, probably an insurgency group both in Iraq and Syria. There's been numerous suicide attacks in Baghdad, and they have claimed a responsibility for attacks in England, in Europe, and the United States. So ISIS is not going away, unfortunately. They won't be the same caliphate that they have controlled territory, but ISIS sadly is with us for the foreseeable future.
Okay, so Gary, big question then is what comes next? What happens in the weeks and months ahead?
Well, what happens now is you'll see an insurgency, and Iraqis that I've talked to have told me, look, once ISIS is done, that isn't the end of this problem, because they'll be called something else. And if you remember correctly, before they were ISIS, in Iraq they were Al-Qaeda Iraq. So they're not going away, George. They'll have this insurgency like they had before. You'll see more car bombs, more attacks, more terrorism in Iraq and elsewhere. And don't forget, there's still a threat in places like Libya. You know, Chris talked about the Philippines, southern Philippines, but Libya is a big problem as well.
Yeah.
They're not going away.
Chris, to you in Jerusalem, I'm wondering how the neighborhood views the impending vacuum that ISIS is going to leave. And when I talk about the neighborhood, I'm talking about the Iranians, the Syrians, and by proxy, the Russians, and then if you include the Saudis, the United States. Is there the possibility that we could see state-on-state, country versus country conflict that now that ISIS is not in that vacuum anymore, in that space rather anymore?
I would say very much, George. I think that's the big concern for most people here in the region is state-on-state conflict. Once the vacuum that ISIS is going to leave, once Mosul is fully taken care of, and Raqqa and eastern Syria and northern Iraq is eradicated by ISIS, then you have, as you mentioned, all these players, the Russians, the Americans, the Iranians. The Iranians have their own goal. They want to have a land bridge all the way from Tehran to Damascus. And that makes the possibility of conflict between the United States and Russia and Iran very possible. That was a warning by one of the U.S. commanders just a few days ago, what's going to happen. And, you know, they have competing agendas. Iran wants that land bridge. And also the Israelis are very concerned about the possibility that if that land bridge is created between Iran, Iraq, Syria, then Hezbollah may have its own ambitions to set up a forward base on the Golan Heights, on Israel's border there with the Golan Heights in Syria. And I think that is really the concern for many people here, that the conflict after ISIS could get actually much bigger and much more dangerous.